All right, well, let's bring in Anne Bremner. She is in Seattle, Washington right now. She is a lawyer, legal analyst. Anne, thanks for your time today. Can we start with the Washington case there and what you make, first of all, of the argument that, look, as president, anything I do is, basically above the law. I've got total, complete immunity. Your thoughts?
Well, I mean, these are first. I mean, we've got a criminal prosecution right now of the former and hopefully future, in his mind, president. And so you've got the issue in the Supreme Court. It's the same thing. I mean, we've never had this issue really that says, oh, we've got a president who's charged with the crime for acts while he was in office, and does he have immunity? We've had the civil question, we've had a subpoena question, things like that in front of the Supreme Court, but nothing squarely on point like this. And I'm sure you'd much rather be watching the Supreme Court oral arguments than sitting where he is in Manhattan.
Yeah, tell me about the credibility of those arguments. When the Supreme Court looks at this, I mean, we've never seen this kind of thing before. Your sense of the sort of legal merits of the claim of total immunity?
Yeah, I don't think he's not gonna get that, but he might get some kind of qualified immunity. And he'll also get a delay, I think, because the fact is, in this case, if the court is inclined to look at some factual issues in this case in determining immunity or the scope of immunity, it goes back to the lesser courts. And that would probably delay the case beyond the election. And then, of course, he could pardon himself or conceivably and move on if he wins the election.
All right.
But, absolute immunity is what he wants, but I just don't see that happening.
Yeah, let me ask you about New York as well, as we are covering both cases today. So we're hearing from David Pecker again, the former publisher of the National Enquirer. Some pretty vivid claims and pretty vivid testimony by David Pecker. Your thoughts on this trial in particular? Your assessment, and of what we've heard so far, and I appreciate it's early going.
Yeah, I mean, I think the prosecution should start, with the bang and end with the bang, primacy, recency. But when you look at David Pecker's testimony, it's not like, he's got bombshell evidence. I mean, you can do catch and kill. That's legal. They should have started something more central, but they're trying to, I think, bury Michael Cohen because he's got a whole circle of, credibility issues around him, including lying to prosecutors, lying to Congress, and committing fraud in this case.
Yeah, so your thoughts on, how this might play out, this particular trial against Trump, the idea that they were trying to cover up stuff, to conceal it from voters, in the final days, Anne, of that presidential campaign in 2016. As you know, the prosecution is saying this isn't about hush money. I mean, it's part of it, but it's really about election interference.
Yeah, I think it's really tough because they didn't charge election interference. What they're basically putting it is in kind of backwards and saying he committed fraud in characterizing these entries as legal costs when in fact they weren't. And that's the misdemeanor. But if you get to the felony, you have to say he committed some kind of fraud with these entries and characterizations with the intent to commit election fraud, which they couldn't charge in the first place. I think he's hoping for a misdemeanor, at the worst, because you're not looking at jail time and he could probably get through an election with that. But if he goes to prison, it's kind of amazing that the Secret Service would have to go with him. I mean, it's just kind of a bizarre scenario if there's a conviction on the felony. His jury, I think he's got a couple lawyers on there, but he has one that watches Michael Cohen either on TikTok or in podcasts. And Michael Cohen has all kinds of bad things to say about, about Trump from the time he worked with him up until now. So I think it's a really difficult case, but it's historic. It's huge. The president of the United States is being prosecuted, or former president, for crime. We've just never seen this before. And I wish there were cameras in the courtroom. But in New York, after the Lindbergh kidnapping of all things, they didn't want to have cameras anymore because that was a circus. But that was a long time ago.
Anne Bremner joining us from Seattle, Washington. She's a trial lawyer, legal analyst. Thanks for this, Anne, today. Good to see you.
Nice to see you. Thanks.